The West is heading in the direction of mass violence against Muslims. I think that's a reality we have to confront. Many times people in our community have hewed to pieties that are more wishful thinking than reflection in reality, where people say rather ridiculous and absurd things like America is the best country in the world to be a Muslim. Until and unless you have lived in every country, you can't make that statement. Many people who are Muslim have had their lives ruined by the United States. So it's sort of a very strange kind of position to take. And the reason I point that out is because I think we have lived for a very long time with our heads in the sand as a community. We have had our priorities entirely backwards, with the result that we now have as the nominee of one of our two major political parties, the most openly anti-Muslim candidate and the most religiously bigoted candidate in a very long time. And that is ultimately, I think, a reflection on our failure as a community, that we have spent our time and money building mosques and schools, all of which are ultimately useless if you have no religious freedom and you have no political representation and you have no social power. Until and unless you have the ability to protect and advance your rights, every other thing is secondary, because without those things, none of the things you build can last or be sustained. We live in a country now where the majority of Americans believe that Muslims should be banned from our nation. If you remove Donald Trump from the question in polls, more Americans agree than do agree if Donald Trump's name is attached to the statement. In other words, people really don't like Donald Trump, but they might agree with some of his proposals. That's a reality, and that's a problem. And the question is, what do we do about that? And the reason I'm harsh is because, I don't know how old all of you are. I can guess how old a lot of you are. But the last instance of genocide in the West was against Muslims. It was in Bosnia. In many of our lifetimes, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of European Muslims were killed by fellow Europeans, oftentimes preceded by rhetoric very similar to the kind of rhetoric we're seeing and hearing today. And if this scares you and unsettles you and depresses you, it should. Because you have to face it in the eye and see it for what it is. And if we don't do that, we open ourselves up to a very uncomfortable reality. Because some people say if Donald Trump is defeated, this goes away. My fear is that this is just the beginning. That Trump himself may very well be defeated and badly defeated, but the language and the rhetoric that he has opened the door to do not easily get shut back up. So the question is, what do we do about that? We have here in the United States, as Muslim communities, opportunities and responsibilities that other people in many other Muslim countries and communities do not have. The demand to be politically engaged is first and foremost a demand for self-preservation. A community that is not at the table is on the table. And an isolated community and a demonized community that does not talk to other people and break out of its boxes is only dooming itself. But at the same time, we also live in a country where we have the opportunity, if we are politically engaged, to weigh in on issues that very few other communities anywhere in the world, regardless of religion, can possibly influence. Because we still live in and are part of the most powerful nation in the world. And so if we take advantage of political opportunities and engage in politics, we can have effects on policies that influence people all over the world. And that creates another moral responsibility for us as a community. That we actually have the ability to change people's lives or prevent their lives from being ruined in ways that few other people can even imagine. Because when we have a conversation in the United States about X, Y, and Z issue, it can result in a dramatically different landscape. The decision to go to war in Iraq fundamentally changed the Middle East, if not the world, for decades to come. And that was a decision that was created in Washington. So if you're not at the table, you're also allowing whoever is at the table to make decisions that influence tens of millions, if not billions of people. Now, my question is, why haven't we gotten to where we should be? And if we look at Muslim history, we know that there have been many times in the past where Muslims have formed dynamic and thriving and powerful communities. So it's not like we lack the historical precedent for being influential and for being capable and for being resourceful and having an impact. We know that we're human beings, and no human being by race or ethnicity is any different or any more superior or less superior than any other. So it's not like we're held back by our ethnic identities or racial identities. We're held back by a failure of vision, by not really knowing what we want and not having the discipline to get there. And the reality is that politics is a lot like sports, right? I mean, you could be playing the Warriors, and if Muslims were playing the Warriors, they would just complain the whole time about how it's unfair that they can hit a lot of threes. Right? Like, that's not fair. It's that the system is rigged, right? Fine, the system is rigged, but that's reality. You have to come to terms with it, right? And in every sport, in every competition, people have different roles to play, right? The quarterback can't advance the ball down the field if he gets tackled. Some people's entire job is to prevent someone else from getting tackled. And that could be your job. That could be your role, right? We can't go anywhere as a community as long as Islamophobia exists. Until and unless we pin down the voices that are trying to destroy us, we can't have our concerns heard because we've been demonized. So that lack of vision and that lack of strategy has come back to haunt us as a community. But again, there's no reason to believe that we can't change this. And there are three reasons, I think three substantial reasons for optimism. The first is here in the United States, anti-Muslim sentiment is one of the more acceptable faces of a generalized intolerance and history of supremacy that threatens a lot of Americans. Probably the majority of Americans. It's not just anti-Muslim sentiment. It's anti-Latino sentiment, it's structural racism, it's anti-black racism, right? It's anti-immigrant sentiment, it's xenophobia, it's misogyny, it's homophobia. All these things co-present. We have allies, we have people who are just as existentially threatened as we are, right? That means we're not alone. It's not 1.5% of America against 98.5% of America. But until and unless we build those partnerships, we won't realize that, and we won't be able to stop that. And we have to make the case that anti-Muslim sentiment is the same thing as, and just as threatening as, all these other kinds of bigotry, because they travel together. Right? Someone once compared Donald Trump to the living embodiment of the comment section on a website. Right? Like he's just that troll. And he just trolled the Republican Party. It's actually kind of ironic because it's like he identified the Republican Party as ripe for conquest and then conquered it and installed himself as the new leader. And he's opened the door to a lot of ugliness, but that ugliness hits a lot of people, not just us. That's the first reason for optimism. We're not alone. We have partners, we have allies, we have people who are in this fight for the same reasons we are, because it's the same fight. It's a question of whether America continues in the direction that it's been moving in fits and starts towards, or goes back to what America has been for a very long time, and that is also part of American history, and that is a very ugly and dark chapter in much of our history. The second reason for optimism is Stephen Harper. If you've heard of him, you should, because he was prime minister of a country that's a few hours away, ran his most recent re-election campaign on an increasingly anti-Muslim platform. He made the niqab and hijab and Islam itself and Syrian refugees platforms for re-election. He tried to make hatred and fear of Muslims his ticket to remaining in power in Ottawa. He was roundly defeated. He was crushed. And now Justin Trudeau is Prime Minister of Canada. And he has a completely different vision of Canada, which proves what? That if you vote and you get involved, you can make a difference. And you can transmit a very powerful and very important lesson, which is, if you run on anti-Muslim sentiment, you will be defeated. This doesn't win elections. And the third happened just yesterday. Sadiq Khan is a British member of parliament. He's a Pakistani Muslim. He ran for mayor of London, which is, with New York, one of the two most important cities in the world. His opponent of the Conservative Party, Zach Goldsmith, increasingly tried to make the election about Islamophobia, about how Sadiq Khan was allegedly an extremist, and he hated England, and he hated Europe, and he hated everything about the West. And Khan won yesterday. He is now the mayor of London. He is one of the most powerful Muslims in the Western world. He is mayor of one of the most critical cities on the planet. And he won with a larger mandate than any other British elected official in the entire United Kingdom. Islamophobia failed. So in November, inshallah, third time's the charm. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.